Olá, bem-vindas e bem-vindos. Eu sou a Mariana Almeida e este é o McKinsey Talks, direto do estúdio da McKinsey em São Paulo. E o tema de hoje é inteligência artificial, mais especificamente um estudo feito em 2021 e que nos trouxe uma série de insights. E quando o assunto é inteligência artificial, muitas pessoas logo pensam no exterminador do futuro ou guerra nas estrelas. Mas as aplicações dessa tecnologia vão muito além da ficção científica e estão bem presentes no nosso dia a dia. Como no algoritmo que recomenda filmes na Netflix ou na otimização logística de um negócio. Nossa conversa será em inglês, porque para falar sobre isso estamos conectados com Michael Chui, sócio da McKinsey em São Francisco e líder do McKinsey Global Institute, que é o braço de pesquisa sobre negócios e economia da McKinsey. O Michael liderou este estudo sobre inteligência artificial nos últimos 4 anos. Welcome, Michael. It's great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. E também está conosco aqui no estúdio Pepe Cafferata, sócio da McKinsey em São Paulo e líder da Quantum Black na América Latina. A Quantum Black é uma empresa de Advanced Analytics, ou analítica avançada, adquirida pela McKinsey em 2015 e que auxilia companhias a usarem dados na sua tomada de decisões. Hello, Pepe. It's good to have you here also.
Great to be here too. Thanks for the invite.
It's our pleasure. So let's get started. Michael, can you tell us about the latest research on artificial intelligence that you led?
Of course. Thanks, Mariana. We've run this global survey of executives around the world for the past 4 years, looking at their use of AI. This year's survey had about 1,800 respondents from a wide variety of industries, everything from manufacturing to global services. And each year we look at which companies are adopting AI, what benefits are they achieving from it? And each year we try to understand what are some of the emerging trends, whether it's risk or cybersecurity, and try to understand what the best practices are underlying those companies that are actually able to capture value from AI.
Great, perfect. And what were the main findings?
Well, the headline finding is really that AI adoption continues to increase over time. This year, 56% of the respondents from, again, these corporations around the world have embedded AI into the production of their process, not just production, not manufacturing, but embedded it into their business processes, either within a business unit or a function. And that's actually up from 50% from the previous year. And so what we see is this continuing increase in adoption in AI. But not only are companies adopting AI, they're actually capturing more and more value from it. And as a result, are deciding to invest more. 2/3 of the companies we surveyed actually said they're going to increase their investment in AI over time. And the biggest increases in AI adoption really came from companies in emerging markets. So we've really seen these companies start to open their aperture in terms of what's possible, particularly during the pandemic, using digital technology. And certainly AI is a cutting edge example of digital technology.
Okay, thank you. And is it mostly high-tech companies who are using AI?
Well, it's certainly true that some of the companies that we know of as being these online giants are some of the companies that are leading in their use of AI. And they're really getting significant business benefit from it. But one of the things that we really discovered as we surveyed, again, across all sectors, is that really AI is being adopted very, very broadly across all sectors. It's not just these online giants. We're seeing AI being adopted across industries, from auto manufacturers to retail companies, from banks to agriculture.
Interesting. And what types of AI applications are companies using?
Well, this is one of those things where you hear the words artificial intelligence, and you might think, it's stuff out of science fiction, right? We watch Star Wars or Star Trek, and we see these, androids come out and they talk with human beings. They look like human beings. And you think, well, in business, it must be things like chatbots being used for customer service, for instance. And that's certainly true. There are some applications where we're seeing the automation of customer service, whether it's online or through text. But the other way to think about AI really is, I don't want to say it's the boring part of business, but AI is just analytics taken up to the next level of sophistication. And when you think about it that way, there's no part of the business that we haven't discovered. And, Pepe can talk about this with regard to quantum black. There's no part of the business and there's no industry where analytics can't actually provide more value. And if you think of AI as if you think of AI as a more sophisticated level of analytics, that really means that AI can be applied across the business. And so we do see use cases in basically every business function. For instance, in service operations, we're seeing it, I mentioned before, to automate, some of the customer service interactions that people are experiencing. But we also seeing it used to optimize service operations, whether it's things like scheduling human beings who are, operating in that area. We're seeing, we're seeing companies upgrade existing products by embedding AI into those systems. And some of the most popular, corporate uses of AI include things like improving marketing operations, upgrading their analytical capabilities in HR or in logistics risk. And they're also using it to optimize their supply chain. We know, there have been some real challenges in global supply chains. Again, if you can, be able to optimize your supply chain, not only for cost, but resilience, be able to use it in order to use predictive maintenance in a manufacturing environment so you have a lot less unplanned downtime. Those are all applications of AI, which, again, a lot of people might not think of, but it really drives tremendous value within a business.
Great. Pepe, do you want to add anything else about Latin America? Some cases here in Latin America?
I think in Latin America, what we see is generally we're a bit behind the rest of the world, but accelerating quite dramatically. And if you look at the first wave of artificial intelligence and analytics applied to business, it was largely around the banks, right? The retail companies, the telecommunications companies. And that has come a long way in the region. But given how the region is and how important it is in the region, the whole thing about commodities, basic materials, mining, manufacturing, exports, we're seeing a big wave and growing wave of use of these artificial intelligence models, solutions, methodologies, more in the B2B arena. And we're seeing this across the whole value chain to transform the business, as Michael was saying. So we see this in the commercial area to try to better understand from a B2B perspective, how do I better serve my customers? What's the preferred next service or next order I should offer to them in a much more targeted way, and helping salespeople be much more productive. We see this in the supply chain, as Michael was mentioning, to be more efficient, to be driving the supply chain at more resilience, or even at higher margins, right? We see that in the manufacturing field. We see that in agriculture, and one of the most fascinating things of fields of innovation right now in the intersection of analytics, artificial intelligence, IoT, data, is in agriculture, right? So today you have a wealth of information from satellites and from weather that you can combine with proprietary information that the farmers can build with sensors, with drones, with different techniques to collect information. And you have massive amount of data that can help the farmers, can help the producers make much better decisions on how to optimize the yield, what is the optimal level of water or nutrients or fertilizers, on when should they harvest, what's the optimum time to do that, how do they schedule the trucks to come to pick up the grains. So there's a whole amount of innovation, and Latin America there is at the leading edge. If I look at the things that are being done in Brazil, in Argentina, on agriculture, we are really at the leading edge of the world.
Great, thank you very much. So Michael, if every industry can use AI and AI can be used in every part of the business, are all companies achieving the same benefits?
Well, part of the story that we've discovered, through our surveying is there really is a broadening set of companies which are deriving benefits from AI, and it continues to increase over time. 27% of our survey respondents said that, at least 5% of their EBIT can be attributable to their use of AI, and that's up from 22% the year before. So we do see this broadening. That said, what we've often discovered with digital technology is that it tends to increase the gap between the leaders and the laggards. We identified a relatively small set of companies, less than 10% of our respondents, who report deriving at least 20% of their EBIT attributable to their use of AI. And what we've discovered is that these, by the way, they're not just high-tech companies, right? There are companies of this type in basically every industry. And these AI leaders are achieving an outsized amount of impact from their use of AI and really outcompeting some of their peers within their industries. And so we do have this dynamic where there are a number of these AI high-performing leaders who are really on the frontier and everyone else trying to catch up to them.
Okay. Pepe, do you want to add anything else about the region?
Yeah, I think the distance between the leaders and the laggards, as Michael was saying, is expanding and it's rapidly increasing. And we see leaders applying AI in a very thoughtful way, in a very focused way. And one of the most interesting things about AI is that it's not really only about AI. It's really about how the organizations and the people within the organizations use AI and leverage AI to make better decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? And when you look at about the survey that Michael was mentioning and the leaders, there are a few traits that are really distinguishing these companies from the rest. Number one is they have a CEO or an executive that is very senior, that is championing and investing and really driving these initiatives forward. Using AI is not easy, right? You have to change the way people make decisions. A lot of people make decisions based on their experience, based on Excels, based on 20 years of having done the same thing again and again. And now we are trying to enrich that and augment that intelligence with models, with analytics. And there's a big change that needs to happen there. So having a very committed, decided CEO or CXO role modeling this kind of behaviors and this kind of focus is super important. The second thing is, as I mentioned, you need people to make different decisions. And to do that, you need to help them change, right? And to do that, it's really important to involve them from the very beginning of the process. They need to be part of the process. They need to be part of the development of the models. They need to be part of how these things work. They need to understand why models are making certain recommendations. They need to understand how to use that. At the end of the day, they need to trust that the model is going to make their lives easier. It's going to make their sales be more effective. It's going to make their operations be safer, be more productive. So taking people, the front lines, the analysts, the people in the plants along in this journey so that man plus machine can make much better decisions is where we do see these leaders making amazing progress. And this is not easily replicable, right? I mean, you can do a model, you can use artificial intelligence and models from different places, but getting this to work and getting people to make different decisions, change the way of working, change their mindsets, use data in a more pervasive way, it's a big cultural change, and the leaders are investing significantly in this adoption and in the people that need to be working differently with AI.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. You talked a lot about people and mindset and processes here, but regarding the technology, how are AI high performers achieving their high performance? Do they have much better technology?
Yeah. So technology is a big part of it, right? But it's not the only part. So we always talk about our protocols, and our protocols involve people, which is specialized people. As you said, includes processes, but also includes technologies. And the technology now is advancing quite quickly. And what we see is that going to the cloud and adopting cloud for everything that has to do with data, analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, is significantly allowing companies to go faster, to go at a much broader scale with more massive data sets, with much more computing power to be able to develop these models, right? And the cloud providers are really building cutting-edge services all the time that you can really leverage to shorten the amount of time you need to go from an idea to an AI solution that is implemented in the field. But not only there, I'm sure Michael will expand on this, but using the technology to run these models in production and running hundreds of these models in production, making sure that they are really giving the right recommendations, that the data that is coming in is the right data, that the quality of the data is maintained, that the quality of recommendations also is maintained. So the technology to run these models, hundreds of these models, together at the same time in a production-grade environment with safety, with security, with risk guardrails is also super important.
Okay. Michael, would you like to add anything else?
It is one of the themes, as Pepe was saying, that we discovered emerging from this ongoing set of surveys, and particularly this past year, which is this idea that the AI high performers are really starting to professionalize or industrialize their AI processes and practices, including a new tool stack that enables some really remarkable things. One of the things that actually enables is just more predictability, being able to estimate how long and how much it will cost in order to capture a certain amount of value. Again, if you compare the leading companies and their use of AI, these AI high performers, and compare how much it costs for them to execute a project versus what they estimated in the AI field. For most companies, more than half of the time, they blow their budget, that they're over budget in terms of an AI project. Whereas for the AI high performers, it's less than half that likely for that to happen. And so what is it that they're doing, the high performers? There's a set of practices which we loosely describe under the term ML ops, or machine learning operations, which include a new tool set, but a new set of practices. It is things like being able to automate data pipelines, being able to more quickly and often do pre-deployment and post-deployment testing of the performance of models, which, by the way, has been incredibly important during the pandemic, because we've seen these huge spikes in demand and changes in supply chain. Many of these companies have had to retrain their models very quickly. And what this set of practices called MLOps allows you to do is to train your models an order of magnitude faster. Rather than taking months or maybe weeks to deploy, you can train and redeploy a model in days or even hours. And if you think about the potential business implications of that, it just allows you to compete much better. And it's based on these sets of practices within the ML tool stack and practices and processes.
Well, AI is a powerful technology. So, Pepe, what about the risks of using it?
Well, obviously, the use of AI implies risks. I mean, this is one of the most important priorities in terms of risk assessment and risk management and risk mitigation of these technologies, right? And there's multiple risks. One of them is obviously the cybersecurity risk, right? Is keeping the data of our companies, of our customers safe and secure, right? And this is truly important. You see in the media day in and day out reports on hackers getting databases, massive databases from banks, from credit card companies, from retailers, from you name it, right? It's very pervasive. So the thing that we see the leaders and the AI leaders adopting is a set of very strict standards and practices around cybersecurity to identify very clearly where are the risks, where are the parts of the chain where you might have an issue, and then quickly going and protecting the company and protecting the data from these attacks. And you need to have very strong processes, very well-trained and specialized people, and very also sophisticated technology to be able to manage these risks in cybersecurity.
Michael, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, one of the remarkable things that we found in our surveys is, as Pepe mentioned, cybersecurity is an incredibly important risk and recognized, by most survey respondents. But the truth is, other than cybersecurity and compliance, a whole set of other risks, which people talk about a lot, for the majority of our survey respondents, unfortunately, they did not recognize those as being relevant to their company. And of course, if you don't recognize it as being relevant, you're not taking any steps to mitigate it. We do think this is a real challenge. And those risks are, myriad. They span from privacy to explainability, being able to understand why an AI system gave the results that it did. Safety, for instance, some of these AI systems are in safety critical areas, particularly ones that involve physical systems, whether it's robotics or automobiles. And then also equity and fairness. And again, sometimes it was only 20, 25% of companies who responded and said, that particular risk is relevant to us.
Do you think there are other risks that companies are ignoring, or do you want to specify anything else about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's take just one example of a risk that we see that is quite widespread, and yet most companies don't recognize it as being relevant. One way to think about AI, described AI as being analytics taken to the next level of sophistication. What that means is it can scale up judgments. And so let's take the example of using AI in order to read CVs or resumes, to automate that process. You could imagine, look, this makes sense. We'll simply train the AI system based on the people who've already been successful at a company, and then have it try to understand what characteristics they have, and then apply that to the screening of initial candidates for job placements. Well, the real problem about that is if you already have imbalances or biases within your internal systems, let's say, for instance, fewer women at the executive level, it might be that the system actually learns the markers of those characteristics and applies it. And so what you end up doing is exacerbating some of the biases that existed before, or some of the inequities that existed before. And so again, unless you recognize that as a risk and take active steps to identify and mitigate those risks, these systems might exacerbate some of the inequities we already see, because it's learning from the ones that already exist.
So you mentioned already some steps that companies should take, but do you have anything else on the path that companies should take when it comes to mitigating risks? Do you think they could do anything else?
Well, first, you really need to set a foundation and, codify or make transparent those sets of ethical values that you actually want to stand for, the things that you care about, that you want your systems to be able to exhibit at the end of the day. Put those into a framework, so again, that's usable by the technical people, which creates a lens through which you can evaluate all these risks. And so if you're talking about AI applied to personally identifiable information, you might think about fairness and privacy, for instance. But for any system, as Pepe was saying, security is important. Oftentimes, explainability is important. You don't want AI to be a pure black box. You want to be able to explain why the system recommended what it did, whether it's being used in HR, but also for sales forecasting, for instance. So what's the explainability and transparency of models? And also, what do you expect in terms of the performance of the model itself? Again, one of the things that we talk about ML ops is trying to understand how you can make sure you can tell when models drift. Sometimes the external world changes in a way that doesn't match the training set that you did, and you simply need to be able to identify that. If you have all those things in place, then you can start to embed the mitigation of those risks or management of those risks into not only your technical systems, but your processes as well. And sometimes, of course, you can use insurance in order to financially manage or mitigate those risks.
Pepe, what would you recommend to Brazilian businesses that could benefit from AI and are still not using it? How should they get started?
It's a great question. So the first thing for both the winners and the people that are starting the journey and those that haven't started, the most important thing is to really understand where the business value will come from AI, right? And for the winners, it's the next generation and what's the next phase and the next S-curve of use of AI. For the ones that are starting the journey, how do they scale up from having done a few lighthouses to really doing this at scale? And for the companies that are beginning, is what are the 2 or 3 applications of AI where I can really drive value and show the rest of the organization that this can lead me to better decision making, to better results, to better customer experience, to better efficiency, to better security, right? So the first thing is find the treasure map. Where are those business problems that AI can help you solve? Find those and prioritize those. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you need to have an executive team with executive sponsors that are willing to go after this value, right? Because as we explained, this is not easy. You need people, you need technology, you need processes, you need cultural change. So you really need to have a top team that is committed to making this happen and to capture this value and to invest in it, right? And it's not only investment in technology, it's investment in people, it's investment in time, it's investments in having people work in a different way, it's managing resistance, it's getting together multiple areas of the organization to work together, bring down the silos and have something done differently. So that's the second piece. The third thing is the data piece. Absolutely critical, but we do believe that data piece has to be business driven. So let's find the business problems we need to resolve, and then we go and resolve the data issues that problem requires. Oftentimes we see companies, we're going to do 2 years of data cleansing and data organization and data governance, and then 2 years pass by and there's no single dollar that can be attached to that project, right? So we are much more inclined to get the business question, get the business problem clear, and then get the data to do that. Of course, you need to build the data foundation so you can do that repeatedly again and again over time at scale, right? But it's a business-driven approach to data. Then we also have the technology, and we talked about it, the cloud, and how the cloud can help us here, and how different technologies in terms of AI and cybersecurity, the whole MLOps, data and tech stack, super important as well. And then there's something that we call the operating model, right? And we do believe that to make magic happen and to make results come true, it's truly important to have teams of people that come from different disciplines working together in a very productive, efficient, and empowered way. And we call it agile, but the truth of the matter is you need someone from the business, a product owner that knows the business, knows the client, knows the problem you try to solve. You need data scientists that can build these models. You need data engineers that can help with all the data ingestion and the data pipelines Michael was mentioning. You need software engineers or machine learning engineers to make sure you have production level code, then you can scale up. You need designers to be able to help you have a model output and a model process that is friendly to the user, be it the client, be it the frontline person in a branch, be it the plant operator in a control room, right? You need Scrum Masters to help all these people work together. And these people need to have a very clear goal and very clear protocols. We are obsessed about protocols, right? So getting all these things together is crucial. And the last point, which I mentioned before, but I cannot stop repeating this because it's hugely important, and this is where 60 or 70% of the companies fail, is in the adoption. I've seen it again and again, clients that have amazing models, hundreds of models, and no one is using them. And this is really, really a problem. And to fix that, that's what we think the cultural change, the adoption, the role modeling from the top team, and getting these protocols in place so you can change the way people make decisions that overcome the obstacles and the frustrations and the rejections that come from why should I do things differently because a machine is telling me to do so, and helping people understand that this is to augment things, giving the explainability to explain why models are saying something or giving a certain recommendation. All this adoption change management is hugely important. So you need commitment from the board, clarity in the treasure map, data, technology, people, and a process and a protocol, and the adoption to make things real in the everyday life of the company.
We are coming to the end of our session. So Pepe and Michael, would you like to add anything else?
This is a long journey. This AI is not something that will be this year's fad, and the next year we'll be on to something else. And so what we've discovered is actually companies do climb a learning curve, and the sooner you start and the faster you try to climb, the more benefits you'll get from it. So my encouragement is to really just bring your company along. And particularly the front line, the front line and top management are two areas where there's tremendous leverage of getting people to understand AI and ML.
Yeah, I would complement. There's a lot of hype about AI, and there's a lot of expectations about AI and how it should add value. And if you look at the field of AI, there's thousands of companies doing something related to AI, right? And our belief is this is not a technology problem. This is not a technology challenge. This is a leadership challenge, right? Leadership in multiple senses. Leadership of the top team to embrace AI, to make better business decisions, to serve better their customers, to have safer operations, to manage better the risks that the company is facing. It's a leadership problem in terms of having people from different functions working together towards an end goal, which is doing something with AI that can resolve a business problem, that can really drive value, that can make a patient be better off, that can make a customer be better served. And you do need a leadership in terms of the change management and adoption, and a leadership mindset about being open to enrich your decision-making process, being open to make decisions differently, be open to change the model of success in your company. And before, success was driven by experience. Now it's driven by experience plus analytics and AI. So this is really a leadership and people issue that needs to be complemented by technology and by very strict and rigid processes to make things happen and scale up.
Thank you very much, Michael and Pepe, for your insights. It was a fantastic conversation. Muito obrigada também a você que nos acompanhou em vídeo ou em podcast. E se você quiser saber mais sobre inteligência artificial ou entrar em contato com os nossos especialistas, envie um e-mail para mckinsey-talks@mckinsey.com. E para conhecer a agenda completa do McKinsey Talks, acesse mckinseytalks.com. Lá você pode conferir este episódio e também os anteriores, em vídeo ou em podcast. É isso aí, muito obrigada e até a próxima.